Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey, Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, the Calder Cup final is underway. The Firebirds find themselves tied 1-1 with the Hershey Bears with 3 games now coming to Coachella Valley. So that's going to be interesting. We'll talk and break down games 1 and 2 in just a little bit. We've got some more Seattle Kraken coaching news and updates to get to. And then also we've been talking a lot about how the Seattle Kraken need to somehow find a star player, that big addition for this offseason. And now there's rumblings that one of those level of players is looking to get out of their current situation. So we'll talk and see if that makes sense for the Kraken in just a little bit. But of course, got to start off by thanking our wonderful sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, for sponsoring the podcast. As always, their June Burger of the Month, RJ. Here it is. It's the LGBTQ Smash Burger. It's a double smash burger topped with lettuce, guac, bacon, tomato, and queso on a toasted bun. Now, again, I don't like burgers. I don't really like food in general, but I'm told that that sounds pretty good by people who like food.
Correct, Dylan. It does sound very good. It's creative, too. I like the idea.
Yeah.
And I think all the flavors actually mesh really well together. So go get that burger of the month while you can, as we're now more than halfway through June. It's gone by fast.
It is flying by. This month is absolutely flying by. So, and that burger is available at both Queen Anne Beer Hall locations, both the original and the Moss Bay Hall location. So go check that out. All right, RJ, let's get started with the news and notes. And let's go ahead and start with that coaching news for the Seattle Kraken.
Right. So a little bit more coaching news here, as Dan Bylsma will eventually have the task of kind of filling out his coaching staff, although he's a little busy right now with the Firebirds and the Calder Cup finals. But one of the assistant coaches under Dave Hackstall, and that is Jay Leach, has taken a different job. He's signed with the Boston Bruins as an assistant coach. So it's kind of a lateral move for him career-wise, but with the team that's done better in the standings and a team that he has some history with too. He was in the Bruins organization as the head coach of the Providence Bruins, their AHL team, before coming to the Kraken when the Kraken came into the league. So Jay Leach, for those who might want a refresher, he was an assistant coach with the Kraken for the team's first 3 seasons. He was in charge of the defense and the penalty kill. So he was kind of the defensive oriented coach, and Kraken players had spoken very highly of him. And some even said he was the favorite coach that they've had. He did a lot of work developing some of the Kraken's defensemen and then also working on the penalty kill. So those were his main responsibilities. So with him going to Boston, that is another opening on Dan Bylsma's coaching staff that he's going to have to figure out. The only coaches, the assistant coaches that remain from last year are Steve Briere, the goalie coach, and I would hope that he would stay. Haven't heard anything about him leaving, though. Goalie coaches usually survive the coaching change. And then Dave Lowry, who we haven't heard anything else about besides the fact that he's just still with the team. But this does leave 2 big spots on the coaching staff, because you have Paul McFarland, who was let go when Hackstall was let go, and he was in charge of the offense and the power play. And now you have Jay Leach, who's the other primary assistant coach, who's in charge of the defense and the penalty kill. What does this mean for Dan Bylsma's coaching staff? How big of a loss is this for the coaching staff, and what's Bylsma going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, we had talked about, in general over the past 3 seasons for the Kraken, we felt like Jay Leach had done a pretty good job with the defense. It was certainly it was a random assortment of parts coming together season 1 just because of the expansion draft and everything, right? It kind of had that feel to it. And I felt like they were, season 1 was rough on everybody. Season 2, though, that defense really stepped up in a big, big way. And a lot of the work that the defense was doing was able to really help feed the offense and feed a lot of what the Kraken were doing as they made their postseason run, game 7 of game 2, all that kind of stuff. This past year, though, was maybe some question marks, as there was some just fundamental stuff. And I called this out a lot on post-game lives and on this podcast throughout the course of the season. But there was a lot of issues with some just kind of basic fundamentals, and it would take a little while for them to get addressed. They were addressed, but it would maybe take a couple games before they were addressed, and then it always felt like something else would kind of pop up. I don't know that that's entirely on Jay Leach, but it is something that we talked about over the course of the year. My big thing with this, though, is RJ. I think it's fine, and it kind of makes sense in a way. And, if you're Dan Bylsma, this probably works because now you just get to bring in your own people for both spots. That probably feels a little bit better if you're an incoming head coach, I would imagine. And if you're Jay Leach, I also wonder, like, how much of this was because we know he was interviewed and taken seriously for the head coaching job, and then you don't get that job, like, do you stay with that team kind of thing, right? Like, I wasn't too surprised to see something like this happen just because of that dynamic.
Right. And I think that's a natural thing with any job in any working environment, right? When you've put in some time with the organization, you put in 3 years, you interview for a promotion when the job becomes available and you don't get it. I think there might be the natural inclination to move on. And that just makes sense. And especially to an organization where you did put in time and now eventually you get the promotion over what the previous job was with the AHL head coach kind of thing. So it makes sense to me. And I agree with you, Dylan. I think it's probably a little better for Bylsma just getting to pick both of those spots. Usually when you see a coaching change, they do get to pick their assistants and really have that say over their staff. And I think having the freedom to do that is something that's going to benefit any new head coach, just being able to choose the people you work with. And I think that's something that really benefited Dan in Coachella Valley too, because the stories of how he's had the freedom to do that in Coachella Valley. That's one of the reasons that Jess Campbell was on that coaching staff, where he talked to Ron Francis and said, look, can I bring in anybody that I want? Francis said, yes. He's like, okay, because I have somebody in mind who maybe doesn't have the most traditional coaching background, but I think she's the best person for the job. So can I do this? And Francis absolutely gave him the green light. And so I think it's good that that's going to continue with this next coaching staff, whoever they decide to bring in.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's probably fine for the Kraken. I don't know that Jay Leach, like I said, if the defense last year had really kind of sustained and even built upon what they did year 2, I would say, like, this is maybe going to be something that's going to, impact the Kraken, and maybe it's not great news to get. But because the defense kind of took a step back last year, the PK has taken steps back really from year 1 with that power kill and everything. I think this will probably end up being okay, letting Dan go out and get who he wants. Do you also think that maybe, like, just and this is like more like league-wide stuff here, but do you think there's maybe something to this? Because Jim Montgomery is entering the final year of his contract with the Bruins as the head coach there. Boston's probably going to have to kind of undergo some level of rebuild here soon. Maybe Montgomery wouldn't want to hang around for that after one more year, or if he wants, like, way too much money. This is maybe Boston bringing in somebody they're familiar with. They liked his work with the AHL squad, right? Like, they can bring in somebody and have an internal candidate should Jim Montgomery not, like, stay there past this last year on his contract.
It's interesting to think about, and I think there might be something to it. And I think maybe that's something that nothing would be guaranteed or spelled out necessarily at this point, of course. But that's certainly a question that Jay Leach might be asking himself when he's looking at his potential options, right? And I think it's more likely that something like that opens up than maybe Dan Bylsma being let go after 1 year. And then is that a chaotic situation you want to take over, right? That Bruins job is a very coveted head coaching job. So I think it makes sense for Leach from that perspective. And it wouldn't surprise me. Look, I've said this, I think, dating back to at least 2 years ago. I think he will be a head coach in the NHL at some point. It's just a matter of when and where.
Yeah, and I'm with you. The Boston situation, probably feel like you have a better chance of that because Dan is locked in for minimum 2 years now in Seattle. Probably don't want to wait,
right? As a new coach.
Yeah. Unless, again, things go crazy,
barring a disaster. But then at that point, do you want to be the guy that takes over?
No, probably not. So it's it just kind of, this feels like a move that makes sense all the way around for everybody. Makes sense for the Bruins, makes sense for the Kraken and Dan Bylsma, and it makes sense for Jay Leach. And that's just the way it is. That's fine. Yeah. All right.
Now, as far as I do want to talk about one more thing though. Yeah. As far as a replacement, does this mean, because if Jay Leach was on the coaching staff, we know who's going to be coaching the defense and the PK, and of course he would just keep that role. But now with that spot opening up, how does Bylsma want to address that? And there's one candidate, right? Yeah. On the Coachella Valley staff. There was a lot of talk with when Bylsma got the job about Paul McFarland being gone, and so needing to replace that spot. And so if you look at just the responsibilities, Jess Campbell has those same responsibilities in Coachella Valley. And so it would seem to be a 1-to-1 fit if you wanted to go in that direction. Now, if you look at Jay Leach, the guy who's doing that in Coachella Valley is Stu Bickle. He's on the Firebird staff running the defense and the PK. What do you think about him as a potential option? And, is there somebody else that you might have in mind too?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anybody specific in mind, but when it comes to Stu Bickle, I was maybe a little bit more on board with it than I was with Jess Campbell, and we talked about this at the time, right? Like, Jess is such a good developer of young talent, and the way that she just accelerates timelines on prospects and everything, I just feel like it's more valuable to have her, say, as head coach in Coachella Valley than to be, in charge of the power play with the Kraken. Like, I feel like that's not putting her best talents to their best uses. Stu Bickle, I was more like that would make sense coming up at first. Although I don't know, I'm thinking back to like the Kraken games I watched this past year, and then watching what they're doing right now in the series against Hershey. And we'll talk more about this later. But like one of the things they're doing in this series against Hershey is like they've completely changed their defensive style, kind of going from a zone to more man-man. It's a little messy. We certainly saw that in game 2. There's a lot of like kind of issues there. I don't know how much of that would really be on Stu Bickle, but I also know that the PK has struggled through the postseason, and that's also something that would make me maybe pause a little bit. It's sub 80% right now for the postseason. I know they're playing good teams. They're on a deep run, all of that stuff, but still, I think like if you're going to be somebody, coming from the AHL level, you've really got to like have like the best, top or at least top 3 units at the AHL level if you're then going to get the job at the NHL level. And I don't know that that's really been the case for the Firebirds.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think I would be cautious about it, and especially as you're trying to build out an NHL staff that has to turn things around pretty quickly, that just bringing up everybody from the AHL level might not be the best way to go about things. Certainly on the power play side, I think they need to bring in a specialist, somebody who is really good at that, and that can, because they're going to need a lot of improvement from their special teams over what it was last season in order to have a chance, right? We've talked about this. They're probably somewhere between 80 to 90 point team based on what this roster is right now. They can add to it, of course, but you're going to need a bit of a coaching bump there. And there's really nothing in Bickle's results with the Firebirds this season or last that suggests that he can kind of give the group that extra bump that I think they're going to need.
Yeah.
Not that it'll be bad, but there's just nothing exceptional about those numbers.
Right. And for regular season, just to, go in, it was 83.4%, which was good for 11th in the AHL, the penalty kill. And, one of the things,
not bad,
no. And one of the things they were good at, they were top 5 in shorthanded goals, right? They had 12 shorties in 72 games. Like that's pretty good number. So obviously it's an aggressive penalty kill, right? It's one that wants to clog up the middle of the ice, intercept some passes, now counterattack up the ice with some speed. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the Kraken have pieces on the roster that would excel in that. So like I don't think it would be bad if Stu Bickle was to become the assistant coach for the Kraken in charge of that. But I think that, there's probably makes more sense for the Kraken at the stage they're at, trying to come back from everything that happened last year, for them to go with somebody who has a little bit more NHL experience.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of agreed on that point. But yeah, we'll see what Leach. What Bilesma decides to do with that. As I look at my notes at CJ Leach, but yeah, we'll see what Bilesma decides to do with that spot.
Yep, definitely. Now, one of the things that could be added to the Seattle Kraken that could help a lot of things, RJ, a lot of the stuff that they struggle with, is a star offensive player, and one might be available as Patrik Laine wants out of Columbus, which unsurprising.
Yes, unsurprising given that whole situation. Look, Columbus, they're not an organization with a good culture, certainly, over the last however many years you want to talk about. And so it's unsurprising that Laine would want out there. And it seems like the team and the player are going to work something out. So he's going to be traded this offseason. But Dylan, I mean, if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, I'm sure you've heard Dylan bring up the name Patrik Laine a few times over the years. I don't remember when the last time was that you brought him up.
Been a minute.
But yeah, it has been a minute, but he's somebody that you've circled, I think, since really expansion draft times, as somebody maybe the Kraken could look to trade for or bring in. I think our first, ECH debate, right, was around, the Blue Jackets, was the Laine trade good or not for Dubois? So this is someone who's been on your radar for a while
Mm-hmm.
as potentially a good fit for the Kraken. And you look at what the Kraken need going into the offseason, and the number one thing I think we can all agree, and the players and the coaches and everybody is saying, is goal scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And Patrik Laine is a goal scorer.
Yeah.
He scored 44 goals, and this was, a long time, like 7 or 8 years ago. So he is a 40 goal scorer, but those numbers have tailed off a little bit, but a lot of it's because he's been missing games. He's more of a 30 to 35 goal player as far as what he's done recently, but that is the dimension to his game that is special. If you watch the tape, and then with him, you got to look at the tape and watch how he plays. His shot is special. Like his shot is elite. I think I would put it in that class. When he's on his game, his shooting is elite. And so he's somebody who does have the potential to score a lot of goals and fits the Kraken that way. But I'm curious, Dylan, how good of a fit do you think he is? Just what he brings on the ice. We'll talk about the off the ice stuff. We'll talk about the contract situation. We'll talk about the trade dynamics, but on the ice, because that's your specialty. How good of a fit do you think he is? I know you've talked about him in past iterations of the Kraken, right, under Hackstall, but this is a different team. There's a new coach. There's different players than 2 or 3 years ago. Do you think he'd be a good fit?
I think he'd be a better fit under Dan than he would be under Hackstall. Like just because I don't know that really any of the offensive systems that the Kraken tried to run under Dave Hackstall, of which there was not many, would have fit his talents, right? Because he does have that phenomenal shot. He has a phenomenal one-timer, right? Like a lot of it would be trying to set him up, especially on the power play, for a one-time opportunity. There wasn't that much kind of creative puck movement going on before. I don't know that there will be under Dan Bylsma either. However, there's going to be more of a focus on shooting from better areas of the ice. There's going to be more of a focus on attacking the slot. There's going to be more of a focus on having guys net front or net side to be there for rebounds, which I think would benefit Patrik Laine, right? Like he's the kind of guy who's going to shoot from distance, but his shots are heavy. Really, really heavy. Like there will be a rebound, and so if you can take advantage of that rebound, which Dan Bylsma's system, at least in Coachella Valley, very much does, then I think you have something there. It's still maybe not like the greatest fit in the world. There's probably better players out there for the Kraken from a system standpoint, but I don't think this would be a bad one. And if this is going to be really kind of the only situation that you're going to find yourself being able to be a player in, I still think you should kind of go all in on Line A and just know that, realistically, and this is going to make everybody listening probably shudder a little, it's going to be similar to Andre Burakovsky. There's an injury history there. Gotta count on the fact that he's probably not going to be healthy for a full season, because he hasn't since 2019. That's a long time ago. But so I think you have to make peace with that going in. But you look at the production in Columbus, you kind of, scratch out this past season, but before that, he was basically a point per game player each of the last 2 seasons in Columbus. That would benefit the Kraken massively. Having his one-timer around for the power play would be fantastic. I think that would help them out a lot. And whoever they bring in to coach the power play, it gives you a play to go for, which I think would be very beneficial for this group. So I think for a lot of reasons, Patrik Laine would make a lot of sense. He's a good competitor. I really don't see too much downside with it. And, the other thing is, we're talking about like all these seasons ago, right? It's 2019. That feels like forever ago. He's still only 26. Like he just turned 26 in April. Like he's got a lot of good hockey left in him. You know what I mean? Like I would definitely look at bringing him in.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, that he's only 26, because this is a player that, look how many he's played 9 years, right? Already in the NHL at age 26. Or 8 years, 8 years at 26, but he came into the league at 18. He's seen a lot. He's been through a lot. And it's always tough when you come in as a rookie with such high expectations. Remember that draft class where there was Austin Matthews, number 1, Patrik Laine, number 2. And instantly there was, in the Canadian markets, right, there's kind of that rivalry. I think of that game where it was Matthews versus Laine. And I think Laine ended up scoring the overtime winner against the Leafs there. And so it was a big deal. And he's been through a lot. Look, I think there's something that we have to talk about it. Yeah. And it's the fact that he's played in a couple markets already, and things haven't worked out in either of them.
Yeah.
Right. He started his career off in Winnipeg, put up some really good numbers, but ultimately things didn't work out there. and he was traded to Columbus as part of a deal for Pierre-Luc Dubois going back the other way. And it was kind of a big, top draft pick for top draft pick kind of trade where neither of them were working out with the organization. So you give both of them a change of scenery, and then goes to Columbus, and things didn't really work out there either. And so that's one of the top things I've seen people bring up because we tweeted about this a few days ago, saying that we think that Laine would be a good fit in Seattle, and that basically he could benefit from having that change of scenery. But some people have responded and saying, well, look, he hasn't worked out in previous markets. And I just think Seattle is so different from either of those two situations in Winnipeg and Columbus, because in Winnipeg, that is a high pressure Canadian market that you're going into as an 18-year-old. And I think that was really tough on him. And that was, and also you had the other things going on with that team. You had the Evander Kane on that team, Dustin Byfuglien throwing his tracksuit in the shower and all that stuff going on. You had a lot of drama on that Winnipeg team. It's a high pressure market, and that's tough. And then Columbus, I mean, I don't think we really need to explain too much, right? This is an organization that even a year ago thought that hiring Mike Babcock as your coach was a good idea. So I think...
And he came in with John Tortorella still there, and coming off of the John Tortorella versus Pierre-Luc Dubois drama that was going on and everything. Like it was a contentious situation to kind of come into as you're like the traded for piece after that drama. Like that's almost more pressure than he experienced in Winnipeg.
Right. And as much as Columbus, and I got some pushback on that, people saying, oh, well, Columbus isn't a high pressure market. I didn't really mean it that way, but I kind of had to clarify. But still, that's a pressure situation.
Yeah.
When you're brought in for a top draft pick who wasn't working out. And so if you're looking at Laine, if you're looking to acquire him, you have to believe it's kind of a reclamation project, right? Because he's had some issues on the ice with injuries, off the ice. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that he's currently in the NHL Player Assistance Program. Yeah, because he had some mental health issues and eventually kind of checked himself into that program, which I think is great. Yes. That's fantastic that was willing to address that. He's been kind of open about mental health in the past. He's donated to mental health causes. I think that's fantastic. But it's worth talking about because it's in the overall picture of the player, and it's something that's going to be crucial if you bring him in to make sure that he can be in a good mental state in a place where he's there and able to succeed. And I just look at the difference between Winnipeg, Columbus, and then Seattle, which is, I think you look at the culture that Ron Francis has built. That's the number one thing you talk about with Ron Francis and this team, right? Building a good culture where players can succeed. I think it's a little bit more laid back media market, wouldn't you say, Dylan?
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's just a good environment for if you're having this player that you're trying to turn him around. So I think off the ice, I don't have a lot of concerns. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there was concerns around the culture in Seattle at the end of last year, but I think Dan Bylsma coming in, like it's obvious based on every move that the Kraken have made this offseason that they want to address that, right? Like they are doing everything in their power to address that. We both expect that there's going to be a captain named during training camp at some point. You bring in Dan Bylsma, and we know about the culture and his coaching style that he now has. And that he's been using with the Firebirds, and how excited all of those players are, how much of a unit they are, how happy they all are, all of that stuff. And how much they're put into a place to succeed and all of that. And so I feel like, there was maybe some culture question marks with the Kraken. There might still be some lingering elements of that with Seattle, but I don't think it would be on the level of maybe some of what Laine's experienced in the past. And I think that it's heading in the right direction here. And certainly when it comes to, expectations and stuff, I don't know that Laine would have any more on him than, say, Shane Wright coming in, right? Like we as the media, it's going to be about Shane Wright's first full NHL season. Like that's the storyline for next year, And so I feel like that works, and it helps ease you in. And it's also worth noting too, like, we talk about like he hasn't been a good fit because of the high pressure situations and stuff in the past, and yet he's also produced through them. Like I don't want it to sound like he hasn't produced on the ice, even though we're saying he's been in these situations. Like I said, he's been near, for those 2 full seasons in Columbus, nearly a point per game player for those. In Winnipeg, he was scoring a goal at almost every other game pace. right? Like his goals per game is almost 0.5 for his time in Winnipeg with everything that was going on there and them ultimately kind of running him out of town. So he's that good of a player that even when he has all of these distractions around him, even when he has injuries, even when he has everything going on, he's still one of the best players in the National Hockey League. I just think for that reason and everything going on with the Kraken and what the Kraken need and the culture that the Kraken are looking to improve on and Dan Bilesma, all of that stuff, I just think it makes sense, especially in an offseason where your options are going to be severely limited. I feel like this is one of the situations where it could benefit both player and team the most.
Right. And that's a good segue into the roster building perspective of it, the GM perspective of it, too, that I wanted to talk about, because I think that is an even better fit than he would even be on and off the ice. And I think that would be a good fit in itself, because you look at the different options the Kraken have to improve the team. And we've talked about a number of them on this podcast. We've talked about Martin Nietzsche. We've talked about Nikolai Ehlers. We've talked about, free agents like a Sam Reinhart or a Jake Gensel, even though those guys might not really realistically be available. But we've talked about all these things that Ron Francis can do. And you look at the overall situation for the Kraken. They have cap space. They have plenty of cap space to work with this offseason. That is the number one asset that they have. They have, if you fill out the roster, basically you re-sign Beniers, you re-sign Tolvin, and you bring up Evans and Wright, and you fill everything out, and you have a full 23-man roster, and they still have about $9.5 million of cap space to play with. That is a lot of money that they have. And you could move Tanev to free up an extra 3.5. You could maybe move Tolvanen and kind of free up whatever that contract would look like, maybe 3.5 or 4. So they have plenty of cap space to work with. What they are short on is assets to give in a trade. They don't have a bunch of top tier prospects. Shane Wright would be kind of the only one, and you cannot move him. You will not move him. And so what you're looking for is a situation where you can utilize that cap space and maybe overpay for a player. We talked about it with free agents like a Jake Gensler or Sam Reinhart, where you can overpay in terms of dollars as long as you're not giving up a ton in the way of assets. And Patrik Laine is the perfect fit for that, because if you look at his contract situation, he has 2 years remaining on his deal at $8.7 million. Now, that's a pretty high number. If that would be the biggest contract on the team by cap hit. And so that's where a lot of teams, I think, are going to be hesitant, because given all the question marks that we just talked about, is this an $8.7 million gamble that teams can afford to make? I think a lot of teams are going to balk at that cap hit, and I don't think they can really afford to do it. Now, what Columbus can do is retain some salary and make him, say, a $6 million or $6.5 million player, which is going to make that a lot more palatable. But I think Francis should approach the Blue Jackets and try and take on that full cap hit, because the Kraken are in the position to do that. And that should make the trade return a lot less, because I think that would reduce the market of teams that can do that. And if the Blue Jackets are interested in moving that whole contract, I think that could be really appealing to them. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what their philosophy is going to be on this trade, but I think that's an option for the Kraken, where you can use that extra cap space, have a contract that's maybe a little bigger that you want, but it's only 2 years. That really limits the downside on it too. If it doesn't work out, if he's not the player you want, if he has more injuries, whatever, it's over in 2 years. And by the time you're having to pay, say, a Shane Wright or, Riker Evans, you can do that, and you don't have to worry about the Laine contract being on the book. So it just seems like a perfect situation from a roster building and a cap management perspective for where the Kraken are at right now.
Right. And if you're the Kraken, you look at some of the contracts that end halfway through that after next season, right? Because obviously they have the cap space to absorb it for season one. But like Yanni Gourde and his little over $5 million cap hit's going to be off the books after this season. Brandon Tanev and his $3.5 million cap hit's going to be off the books after this season. You're going to need to do a lot of work on defense, but you've got close to $10 million off the books on defense too. Like, obviously you're going to need to spend to recoup some of that, but like, you're going to have a lot of cap space next off season too, that you can, and the cap will jump again next off season. So you can definitely bring it in for the 2 years. The one thing really just comes down to, because I agree, if Seattle's willing to take on the whole contract, I think that makes them a serious player in the Blue Jackets' eyes, because I don't know how much competition in that space there's going to be. It just comes down to Laine. And does Laine want to go there? And I have to imagine no team is going to trade assets without kind of assurances from him that he's down, right? And he's, in a place where he wants to play and he can play, and he wants to go to that market. And he also has a modified no trade clause for 10 teams. But I think the big thing is just going to be kind of where he's at and what his feelings are towards joining, any specific organization. So this would all be under the umbrella of Laine wants to come to Seattle before anything would even happen. But I think if he does want to come to Seattle, I think Seattle, for those reasons, like you mentioned, are in a good spot to maybe make an appealing offer to Columbus of, say, a prospect and no salary retention. Might be a better deal than Columbus gets from anybody else.
Right, because you look at other teams, if they want to get rid of that full contract, other teams I could think of that might be interested might be like a San Jose.
Yeah.
Where they have all the cap space in the world and they can afford to kind of take a gamble on this reclamation project. He's a good player. You can pair with a Macklin Celebrini, all of that. But if you're looking at Laine and whether he'd want to go there, does he want to be on a team that maybe has a little bit more of a chance of winning? Because San Jose is not there quite yet. And so maybe that's not something he's as interested in or whatever. So that's where I think the Kraken could have a potential leg up, because of the teams that could absorb that full contract, they're a little bit closer to winning, or they're kind of trying to win right away. And I think that might be a little bit more appealing to him, in addition to all the things about, the market, the culture, the media environment. I think that would be beneficial to him too. And so on Laine's side, I think it makes sense. On the Kraken side, I think it makes sense. It's not the perfect move. It doesn't solve everything. Right. This isn't like bringing in a true superstar that's going to just solve all the problems, right? He's not somebody in the Mitch Marner tier of players, that you could go trading for. But when you look at the alternatives, when you look at giving up way too many assets for Marty Necas, when you look at overpaying somebody like a Jake Gensler or Sam Reinhart with 7 years of term, where that's a lot riskier, I think this balances the risk and reward a lot better than any of the other moves that we're seeing.
Right. And if it works out, you just re-sign him. Again, he's only 26. He'll be 28. He'll be free agent year age. It's not gonna feel that crazy or anything. So I think it makes sense for a lot of reasons, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see if Ron Francis can get in there and make something work.
Yep. So looking forward to seeing. I can't wait for all the off season, the rumors, the rumblings, Dylan.
I know
it's going to start as soon as the Cup final's over, but we'll see. I have a feeling we'll hear the Kraken mentioned in a few of those conversations.
I think so too. All right. So you mentioned the Cup final being over at some point here. The Calder Cup final is well underway. I mentioned it earlier. The Firebirds find themselves leaving Hershey after Game 2, tied 1-1. The Firebirds took Game 1, dropped Game 2. They're coming back to Coachella Valley, RJ. They're going to have 3 games at home. This is a team that a lot of the splits and stuff are better for them at home. Certainly on special teams, things are better at home for the Firebirds. Looking at games 1 and 2, RJ, the Firebirds are a better team. I really do believe that. I feel like they're a better team. That yes, they dropped Game 2 and it was 5-2, but you look at the shots, greatly in favor of the Firebirds. You look at some of the saves that Shepard was making for the Hershey Bears. Fantastic saves, right? He definitely stole a goal or two from the Firebirds in that one. And then also, Firebirds are 0 for 7 on the power play. And I know the power play has been getting worse as the postseason's gone on. It was middle of the road in the regular season. But at some point, they're going to start producing on the power play, and they have much better home split for the power play than they do on the road. Their road split is close to 10%. So, I mean, obviously the 0 for 7 in the 2 games in Hershey did not help that, but still it's pretty bad. Whereas it's close to 25% at home so far this postseason. So I'm hoping that kind of changes, but I kind of was looking at Game 2 and I was like, wow, if the Firebirds could have scored on some of these power plays, that game is really different. It's very possible Coachella Valley leaves with a 2-0 series lead. So I think coming home is going to benefit them greatly here.
Definitely. And they haven't lost at home yet this postseason. So that's going to be huge for them. And you look at how the final series went last year too. And the home team won every game until Game 7.
Yep.
It was very much a home-based series, right? And I mean, this is make or break time for the Firebirds, because if you drop a couple of these games, going back on the road, it's going to feel over. But if you win a couple of them, then you're in a situation you just have to win one or two in Hershey, and they've shown they can do that. So this is, and if you do well enough, you don't have to go back to Hershey.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a big motivator, right? You could just take it in game 5 there. So I agree. This looks different than last year.
Yeah,
because we watched a lot of the Calder Cup finals last year, and the balance of how good each team is, right? It feels shifted more toward the Firebirds this year.
Yeah.
I think they did some of the things they needed to do to address how the Bears were able to beat them. Mm-hmm. And the Firebirds seem that extra little step faster. They seem a little bit kind of bigger, more physical compared to Hershey. I think Hershey's still the bigger, more physical team.
Yeah.
But the Firebirds are able to cope with that a little bit better. They're not shying away from those net front scrums. There's been a lot of nastiness already in the series. And so I think they're have been able to hang with that, and they've been able to hold their own. But really the skill is shining through too. I mean, you see it. Shane Wright has had so many dominant shifts in this series so far. They haven't all resulted in goals, but I mean, just the way that he's been able to do that, you didn't see that at all from him in the finals last year, because he was still getting his feet wet, still learning.
Yeah. And even though kind of eased into the lineup back from the injury, I mean, that's really the big news around him. It's just that he's back and playing in this Calder Cup final after being absent for so long, but he looks fresh. Right? Like, he just looks fresh, and really Coachella Valley looks fresh compared to the Hershey Bears. And that makes a lot of sense, because they took care of business in their conference final. Hershey ended up having to go all the way to game 7 with a lot of games in overtime along the way, including game 7. Right? Like, so yep. It was a lot. And Hershey, they look a little tired, right? Like, it looks like they are a little tired. The Firebirds are a faster team. They're a more skilled team, I would say. And they're definitely out there kind of flying around, trying to do their stuff, getting a lot of shots on goal, all of that stuff. It's really there's only like 2 or 3 things that concern me for the Firebirds, which is a lot less than last year. And that is the power play, which I kind of already mentioned, but game 1 became close. It ended 4-3, and it was only close because the Firebirds had 4 third period penalties in very quick succession. Like, this was one after another that they had these power play opportunities in the third period, up 4-2. And that's the time to close out a game. That's the time you score on any one of those, that game is over. And in those 4 power plays, they got like 2 shots on goal combined. Like, it was really, really rough to watch. And maybe there was some element of they're up by 2. They did, they're maybe taking their foot off the gas a little. But then I look at game 2, and that game didn't get off the rails in favor of Hershey until a lot later. And at that point, the Firebirds, they've had a couple power play opportunities, and you just didn't take advantage of them again, right? Those were your opportunities to get back in the game, and you weren't able to seize them. So the power play really is something that I think that the Firebirds are going to have to figure out. And if they do, the series is over. Like, it's donezo's, because at 5-on-5, you're already outplaying them. But, there's been enough kind of bad luck goals in both games that have kept Hershey around, that the power play would be the difference maker. And then the second thing that worries me a little bit is the fact that, yes, all the luck is in favor of Hershey. Both of these games, there's been some really bad luck goals, but there's also been some goals that have been maybe a little bit like the Firebirds are putting themselves in a spot where that bad luck could get you. Right? I look at some of these goals, they're coming off the rush for Hershey. There's a lot of lateral movement. Drieger doesn't look, he's not the quickest getting across for all of them. And the defensemen are letting themselves get beat, right? They're not really respecting that Hershey rush. Hershey has a little bit more speed than I think they did last year. And they're really utilizing it and attacking the Firebirds. And the Firebirds defensemen, I feel like they need to get back a little bit more, and they need to help out Drieger. And instead, what we're seeing is a lot of 2-on-1 or even 2-on-2 situations where Hershey's getting looks, or they're able to get pucks on net while Drieger is having to move side to side, and they're resulting in goals. And they're off of rushes where they probably shouldn't be resulting in these kind of weird fluky goals if everybody's doing their job right. And so I think that also is something that the Firebirds need to address. It's just those sequences, because it's happened now both games, where it's just you're just not getting back quite fast enough, and your goaltenders not the greatest side to side, and that's combining to allow Hershey to either score off of defensemen's skates or tap some goals in that I don't feel like would be goals normally. So I think that's another thing that the Firebirds need to look out for.
Yeah, pucks are finding Hershey sticks, but you put yourself in position for pucks to find your sticks. Exactly. Yeah. I agree with that assessment there. And then, yeah, there's a couple unforced errors too. Like, unfortunately, the one last game where Drieger was playing the puck behind the net and waited a little bit too long, gave that up. Those are always tough. But I think that just reinforces that if you don't make those mistakes, if you don't get beat, you're the better team.
Yeah,
it feels like Hershey's had to work a lot less hard for their goals than not haven't had to work as hard, but I mean, you look at game one and they're off of bounces, they're off, versus the Firebirds. You look at their goals and those are plays they have set up deliberately to set something up and to generate a rush and make good passes across and all of that. And generally that's a good sign long term that what you're doing is working and not as reliant on those bounces, especially coming back home. What is it? The right side, if you're looking from the TV camera angle, the net on the right side, and then I guess to the goalie's left, those boards are so bouncy. We noticed that game one in Hershey, right?
Yes.
How the puck just springs off of those things. And it's those little things too, where you know what goes on in your own barn, but it seemed like Hershey was targeting that a few times.
Yeah, no, it's true. It is true. That was an issue there for them. The other thing would be just like I said, the Firebirds, like, they're playing this defensively very different from how they played the Admirals. Because the Admirals, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on this podcast, the Milwaukee Admirals, very big team. They want to attack the center of the ice. They want to go net front. They want to make your goaltender uncomfortable. And the Firebirds did a really good job of forcing them out to the perimeter, taking away those passing lanes to the inside, not letting the Milwaukee Admirals get to Chris Drieger. Right? Like, they were very, very good defensively at kind of playing that zone style defense and keeping them away. And I feel like part of what's also contributing to the Firebirds putting themselves in spots where they're kind of getting beat is that they're trying to play a lot more man-to-man in the defensive zone against Hershey, and there's been some issues with handing off coverage, or like, do I hand off this coverage or do I stick with this guy? And then the next thing you know, the Firebirds have three guys kind of all clumped up together and they're all looking around rather than being on somebody, and now Hershey's open, right? And they can get a good shot on Drieger, and or now the passing lane is open, and now you're forcing, Drieger in a tough spot where he's going to have to move all the way across his crease to try to make a save, right? There's been a lot of those kinds of instances in both of these games where it just looks like the Firebirds don't have the system down yet. Like, they don't have the reps of playing this way. And to be honest, they didn't really play this way much in the regular season either, so that's understandable. I get that obviously the coaching staff feels that this is the best thing for Hershey, but I don't know that the finals is always the best time to change your defensive structure.
Yeah, well, do you think that's a factor of having so much time off in between series?
I wonder about that.
The Firebirds have had a lot of time off, feels like, in between a few of their series this playoffs, right? It feels like they have a really quick series because they go out and win it fast, and then just have a week or more off in between, right? And maybe that gets coaches thinking during that time. Maybe it can even be too much time to think. But yeah, I do think that's interesting that they've kind of changed up. And I wonder if it's the kind of thing they felt might be hard to get used to at first, but would pay dividends later in the series. Mm-hmm. There are a few things like that where I'm interested to see whether it's that or whether it's Hershey being a lot more beaten up theoretically than the Firebirds because they played more games, and whether that, I guess, what form that takes as the series goes on.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like, that's going to be a factor here. And yeah, I do think just because the Firebirds put together such a specific game plan for Milwaukee, it makes sense to think and say, hey, they had the time, they were practicing at Hershey, all that stuff. It makes sense to say, hey, the Firebirds probably put together this game plan for Hershey. Probably were watching Hershey and they said, look, we think this is going to be what's best for us. And again, to their credit, you could make the argument that the Firebirds have played the better games, both games. Like, game one, they were the better team. They couldn't quite close it out as strong as you'd like, but they won the game, and it wasn't necessarily close, and Hershey needed a lot of bounces. And game two, you could make the argument that the Firebirds really outplayed them, and that they got goalied, and that, again, special teams keeps that game from being something that they can close out, and then Hershey kind of runs away with it at the end, and that's it. But, you look, like, shots on goal, the Firebirds had 34 to Hershey's 21, in that second game, and a lot of those Hershey, shots, 8 of them of the 21 were in the third period when Hershey kind of took over late. So like I feel like the Firebirds have played really, really strong. It's just a matter of kind of, picking up and addressing those 2 or 3 things that you're doing that's kind of leaving the door open for Hershey, and then after that you probably take care of business relatively quickly.
Yeah, you would think so. And that's I have so much more confidence to them going back home to be able to take care of those kind of things.
Yes.
Dylan, do you think it's a general thing that home ice means more in the AHL than the NHL?
I think it
Because at least just
does.
it feels that way
It
from
does.
these last 2 playoff runs.
It really, really does. So I think I would agree with that sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah. So as Dan Bylsma said, we're going back to our own barn. We got to make some hay.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
love that line from him.
Definitely. And you can, maybe on the power play also get some more puck movement. Like that would be a way of addressing the power play issues that the Firebirds have had. I'm looking at their shot chart from game 2, and it's basically just 2 areas of the ice. It's the slot, and it's mostly lower slot, and then it's just the top left. That's it. Like just like left side point shots. Like those are the only 2 places the Firebirds take shots on.
Is that Riker?
I probably like that's that's the thing. So maybe you should address that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. I anything else on the Firebirds?
No, I think that's probably it. Like I said, they've looked like a good team. I'm excited to see them for game 3. I'll be heading out there on Tuesday, or tomorrow, I should say. I'm excited to see them, and I think we'll see them bounce back in a big way.
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited, and I'm excited to have you go out there and see it. Give us the real report from out there in Coachella Valley. Yes. It's going to be fun, and I think between the ECHT, right? I know our photographer Jen's going to be out there for game 4 and 5 too. Yeah. So we will have a presence at all of those games, and I know you will be at game 5 if it is decisive.
Yes,
or potentially decisive.
Yeah,
if the Firebirds can take care of business, you will be in the building.
Yeah, so that is definitely something I'm looking forward to. So. Well, we just got to get there. Just got to get there.
Yep.
All right.
How are we doing on time, Dylan? I can't see the time.
Yeah, we're at 47 minutes. We could close it out unless there's something else you wanted to bring up.
Really, just a couple like tiny. I mean, it's not even really rumors or reports, but just from David Pagnotta that I saw on Twitter just happening now. He released his Summer Trade Watch 2024.
Yeah.
And it has all the players, but also just teams reportedly linked. And so I was scrolling down along real quick to see if the Kraken were mentioned on any of those linked teams for the players. And of course, there's 2 players that they are reportedly linked to, and it's Marty Necas, who we've talked about already, and Nikolai Ehlers, who we've also talked about already. But so those are the 2 there. Just kind of quick bullet point notes. Patrik Laine's reportedly linked teams. It says TBD. So
all right.
Still going to do some digging on that. But there's that, and then also there was one. Where was it? It was on The Athletic. Yeah, it was Harman Dayal of The Athletic looking at NHL Buyout Watch 2024. And there was a Kraken player named there.
Oh.
I'm sure you can guess who it was.
Oh. Was it, let's see, Buyout Watch? I mean, was it Tanev?
No.
Oh. Then who? Why am I?
It was Grubauer.
Oh, Grubauer. Really? Oh,
yeah.
It's too early. You got to wait one more year.
Well, that's what I was thinking, although I looked at it again as we were recording this. I mean, this is probably not, probably don't need to do a whole other segment on this, but only if you want to jump into this thing. But the more I look at it, the more I think it might actually make some sense to do it this year.
Oh, it's not that terrible, actually.
Right?
Be a little under $1 million this season, a little under 2.2 next season. Season 3 is the rough year where it's almost 3.3, but then it's under 2 for 3 more years.
The reason I say that it might make some more sense to do it this year is because you compare it to if you wait a year, the cap hit in that third year, right? 26, 27, right. You say where it's bad and it's 3.2. It's 3.1 basically. So it's that year anyway. If you wait a year, it doesn't help you that much. The big difference is it gives you the big savings this year, but it's an extra year of 1.9 essentially at the very end in 29-30. And so that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
Where you save about $5 million this year, but you pay an extra about 1.9 in 29-30.
Yeah. Here's why I wouldn't do it though.
Okay.
And that's because I don't know that the goalie market right now is that great. And I feel like that's something that you can just make the mental decision now that next offseason we're going to do this. We're going to re-sign Joey next offseason. We're going to make this buyout happen next year, and you give yourself a year of planning to prepare for it and to survey the field, so to speak, and everything. Unless you're saying we're going to re-sign Chris Drieger and go with Drieger Joey this year at the NHL level. But I feel like when you're trying to bounce back at the NHL level, I don't know that that would be the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, maybe not. Although, do we really look Drieger versus Grubauer? I think Grubauer it would be an upgrade over Drieger, so that it'd be a slight downgrade.
He's a steadier presence. He's a more predictable goalie to have behind you if you're, say, a defenseman or a forward. Yeah. I think that's something that's beneficial. I think he's a steadier presence.
Yeah, and I think also, but what it comes down to, because I would actually really be open to it after looking at this, is you look at that savings of $4.9 million this year.
Yeah,
you don't really need it. What are you going to use that on?
What are you using it on? Yeah, exactly. Like we've already talked about. Maybe you bring in Laine, but you've already got the money to do that. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to do it right now anyway.
I guess it would let you bring in like Laine and say like a Chandler Stevenson or something, but then you're just getting really crowded of mid forwards.
So many middle of the road forwards. Yeah, they can't. Like that's already what's kind of killing them right now. So
if you think your players for Gensel or something, maybe then that makes sense.
Yes.
But you need something to do with the money, and I just don't think there's anything they can do with the money.
I don't either. I think you also want to keep them around because that way you can manage workloads better too. Because that's the other thing, and we've been talking about this a lot on Red Glare, our Patreon podcast, and the teams that are successful. Let's say the Kraken, improve enough that they can maybe get to the postseason. You want like full-time workload on Joey Decord going into the postseason? You want him to play like 57 games? Probably not. So I feel like
you want more of a tandem for sure.
I feel like you want a tandem at the NHL level right now. If you're any team, it doesn't matter how good your good number one goalie is. You want to have a tandem right now that's going to be a lot closer to an even split. And I feel like keeping Grubauer gives you the better ability to do that with him and Joey should you get to the postseason. And that's why I was saying, like, you probably want to build around a plan of replacing Grubauer before you buy him out, rather than, given that you're not in a rush for the savings right now, I feel like that's a better way to go about it than just doing it to do it and then figuring it out after the fact.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You'd have to have, like you said, a plan in place, and I'm looking at the free agent goalie market, and like there's nobody's standing out to me.
Yeah. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to do it. And this way also you're giving yourself a year of maybe having Nicholas Coco with the Firebirds, and you got to get him acclimated to North America and the North American game and all of that kind of stuff. Like it gives you a lot of time to kind of plan something out. It gives you time to see another year of Joey and work out an extension with him long term, because if you're moving on from Grubauer, I'm assuming you're keeping Joey around for a while. But he's only got 1 year left. That would be the plan. Yeah, but he's only got 1 year under contract. So, like, I feel like all of that stuff kind of goes into it.
Yeah, and it also hurts your leverage, too, I guess, if you're trying to keep Joey's next contract reasonable.
That is definitely clearing the way. That is definitely true. Bought out the other goalie because you're our guy. Also, do you mind taking a pay cut? It's probably not great for them. So
yeah. All right. So I think we're in agreement here, but yeah, it was interesting looking at it again because I had just dismissed it entirely and realizing the fact that he doesn't have any signing bonus money. It's the kind of thing that if you had a plan for your goalie situation and for that extra savings, it could make a lot of sense. I just don't know if they have those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like they do based on our reading of the situation. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. And and on that like little mini heart attack to leave everybody on.
Yeah, sorry, way to go, everybody. RJ. Sorry.
See, it was him this time. It wasn't me. I don't hate the goalie. RJ hates the goalies.
It was the Athletic. Everyone just blamed the Athletic.
Okay, that's fair. We can do that. And then, of course, I want to mention Queen Anne Beer Hall one more time. Make sure, while it is still June, you head over to either Queen Anne Beer Hall locations and you try that LGBTQ smash burger. It does look pretty good. That's what everybody who eats real food tells me. And it makes sense. I mean, it's like a BLT, but more. So like that's
but a lot more.
Like a lot more, and one of which is queso, which like who doesn't like that besides me? I'm the worst person to be doing these food reads. Why we can't have me do the food reads anymore? All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.